introduction so that we can give the full time and flavor to this really special event. But it's really my pleasure to welcome you all to this special booster. And how this started was that we really read your feedback on those kind of annoying surveys that we send out at the end of each session. And one of the individuals participated said, hey, if we're doing arts and humanities, then let's include the culinary arts. And as soon as I saw that, there was no better person that came to mind to lead this booster session than my good friend and colleague and wonderful chef, Jonathan Duskin. So I wanted to introduce you all to Jonathan Duskin. He's a current Neurocritical Care Fellow at Mass General Brigham. He received his BA and MD from Boston University. He completed neurology residency at Mass General Brigham, where he served as chief resident. He received an R25 and INDS research grant to work under the mentorship of Dr. Jonathan Rosand at the MGH McCann Center for Brain Health. His research interests include studying markers of nutrition status and identifying nutritional interventions to decrease the risk of stroke and dementia and to improve post-ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke outcomes. He additionally has a passion for healthy cooking, and he's taught several demonstration kitchens during medical school and residency. So today you're really going to hear from one of our local experts. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chef Duskin. Thanks for joining us.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to do this. This is my second virtual demo kitchen, so I'm still getting the hang of it. I used to teach a lot of them in person back in medical school, but hopefully we can still have just as much fun. Um, yeah, so tonight, as I think you're all aware, we're gonna make a fra diavolo together. The protein of choice is up to you guys. I'm going with shrimp because I like shrimp a lot. And I actually, with Mardi Gras coming up, I actually got some shrimp from Louisiana. So thought this would be a good dish. This is a dish I really like because it kind of encompasses a lot of well, A, it tastes good, but B, also it encompasses a lot of food groups that are really important for brain health. Um, so kind of thing like leafy greens. It's tomato based. There's not really much added sugar or salt. And then I like to use seafood because as another group that's good for brain health. And then I finish it over some whole wheat linguine, which is another food group that's been shown to benefit your risk of stroke and dementia. So I don't know if the people cooking along have prepped so far. I've kind of half prepped, but we can kind of start chopping as we go, and then we can chat a little more. And I'd love this to not be me just talking at you. I'd love this to be interactive. So, if there's any both culinary questions or topics within brain health and nutrition that you guys would like me to dive further in, or just general questions, um, you can feel free to ask throughout, or I can just keep spitting fun facts at you.
Dustin, can I start you off with a hopefully easy question? Tell us a little bit how you got interested in this.
In cooking or in brain health and nutrition?
Both.
Yeah, they kind of both came together. So I got interested in like cooking probably around it was after my sophomore year of college. I stayed at BU over the summer to do research, and it was like my first time having a kitchen in my dorm and not having the dining hall. And I realized that I didn't really know how to cook. Part of it was that my dad is like very into cooking, so he always cooked everything growing up. So I kind of like panicked and asked him like, what do I need to do? And he kind of just gave me a few base recipes, and then I kind of ran with it. And the more I learned about cooking, the more I became interested in trying to make things as healthy as possible. My aunt actually got me this book for graduation from college. It's by this chef Rocco Disperito. He does a lot of stuff on the Food Network. And he basically made this book called Now Eat This. And it was his way of like going into the kitchen and figuring out how to take recipes of foods that aren't traditionally healthy and making them healthy. And I thought that that was like this very interesting challenge to be able to both cook food that is healthy but also tastes very good. So I kind of began to run with that. And then as I kind of progressed through my research, I always knew I wanted to do neurology. I was always interested in kind of Alzheimer's disease in the brain, and then I got interested in stroke also. Um, and I just be interested in ways to kind of like how can we these patients who I see in the ICU, a lot of them come in with big brain bleeds and strokes, and they're at incredibly high risk of having further strokes and of having dementia. So I was kind of beginning to study and look into ways of how can we lower their risk of these things. And kind of funnily enough, I never made, despite like my huge interest in nutrition, I never made the connection that that could be something I could do my research on. And then my mentor, fortunately, like called me into a meeting one day and he said, like, you really love nutrition. Like, and I gave a lecture on it during residency just for fun. But he was like, you're really into this stuff. Like, why don't you do this as your R25 research? Um, and like see where that goes. So ever since then, I've kind of taken off with it and found new ways, study nutrition. I'm interested in kind of coming up with new diets now that are a lot simpler and patient friendly than the available ones. Um, for example, like the big diet right now for like preventing dementia is the Mind diet, which is great, but it has about 15 components. So like when you're counseling patients, I think any of the doctors in the room or people who are patient facing might know, like, there's just like so many recommendations for patients these days for like how to just live healthy that like it's really hard for one of those components to be like 15 different things they have to do. So I've become interested in trying to simplify dietary recommendations and simplifying the way that we can kind of track markers over time. So that's kind of how I got to where I am.
Can you tell us more about what you were saying about the food groups that are healthy? So you said specifically for the recipe. I know that I don't want us to go into a discussion about everything that's healthy, but you said something about shrimp and something about the linguine. Tell us more about that, about each.
So basically, the most popular and well-studied diets right now for stroke prevention, dementia prevention. I mean, the most studied one is probably the Mediterranean diet, and now the Mind diet has become this newer, cooler one. And basically, what these diets have found is that the overlap in the two is basically the groups that are associated with decreased risk of stroke and dementia are vegetables. The Mind diet says that it's not just vegetables, but actually eating leafy greens are important for preventing dementia. So that's one part of it. Fruit is another point, which doesn't quite, well, tomatoes technically a fruit. Um, Fruit is another one. The Mind diet says it's got to be berries, but the Mediterranean diet has found associations with fruit and decreased risk of stroke and dementia. Whole grains are associated with lower risk of both stroke and dementia and are parts of both of those diets. And then they go into kind of like the kind of meat you eat. So poultry, seafood, fish are associated with lower risk of stroke and dementia. Red meat is generally recommended in these diets to be eaten in more moderation. And the Mediterranean diet actually says you should only really be having one serving of meat per week to reduce your risk of stroke and dementia. The Mind diet says up to four servings is probably red meat, sorry, of red meat. So that's why kind of seafood, it kind of encourages things like seafood and chicken. And then the other components are kind of like they encourage olive oil, they encourage nuts, and then kind of avoiding sweets. And then those are the main components. I'm sure I'm missing like one, but that's like kind of the all-encompassing. But as you can see, there's a lot of different things there, and that's hard to when you have a patient sitting in front of you, especially like my patients who like just had a stroke and they're like super stressed about like how am I going to get my life back on track? It's kind of hard to list off like 15 things, so I usually start by just saying like, "Hey, like what do you normally eat at home?" And they'll be like, I've had patients be like, "I like to eat a lot of, I eat pork 3 times a week. I'll have chicken once a week. I'll eat steak twice a week." So like I'll usually start with something simple like, hey, how about, one or two of those days where you would have had pork, you have chicken instead. Or I ask like how much like what's your favorite vegetable? Broccoli? Okay, great. How many servings of broccoli do you eat a day? Like one? Okay, how about we try doubling the amount you eat? So kind of just like taking these diets and just trying to find like ways that fit in a patient's life is kind of what I do with the current literature. What I'm actually studying right now is like what are the five like if you can only like change five things about your diet, like what are the five things that we just need to tell patients to do that's going to get them the most bang for their buck. So that's kind of what I'm working on now. But for now, I kind of just see what fits into their lifestyle. If that answers your question, plus a little bit of a tangent.
No, I love the I love the tangent. Absolutely. Yeah, my wife was making the point of, the other issue with fish that we found is mercury, unfortunately, which is
Yeah, so
yeah, I know that there are
I
some
actually
fish that you can avoid, right? For that.
So the CDC actually has like a really nifty picture. I actually use it because my wife was pregnant and now we have a little well, she's not as little anymore. But so we watch, so that's like why we're conscious of mercury. So there actually is this nice like CDC little diagram that shows like here are the groups of fish that are, very low mercury. Here are the ones that are low that maybe you want to only have once a week if you're pregnant or a baby, and then here are the ones to avoid. And a lot of the common fish are in the very low mercury group. So like things like salmon, like you can get away with a lot of salmon. Essentially all shellfish is low mercury, is very low mercury. It's only really like the most common things that are higher are like swordfish is pretty high mercury. Tuna is like medium to high depending on kind of what kind of tuna and where you're getting it. So that's usually what I do is I just kind of like look up the like what the fish is and what the mercury level is. And by now I've looked it up enough that like I have a sense of which are high and low, but there's still a lot of fish that like you can eat pretty much every day and not have to worry because they're so low mercury. What's everyone's background here?
Hi, I'm on the phone. I'm Susan. I'm a dietitian actually at Hackensack
Oh,
Medical
awesome.
Center and our neuroscience center. And we actually do. We've done when I was working full time. We did a teaching kitchen for the Mind Diet for people that were interested to learn more about it. Do you ever do anything like teaching kitchen?
Yeah, so
Um,
that's awesome. That's how I actually got started. So I went to BU for medical school. And there is an incredible demo kitchen there. It's actually like the location too. They built a new one while I was there. And it's like smack
uh-huh,
dab in the middle of their cafeteria and it's like glass walls so you can see in. So I used to do teach a lot of kitchens there with the head demo kitchen chef, who was this person, Tracy Berg. She was incredible. She was trained at the Culinary Institute of America. She was a chef,
uh-huh.
and then she kind of felt bad about just like all the unhealthy food she was serving people. So she then decided to go to back to school to get her RD, and then was a registered dietitian with this like background as a chef. So me and her would do these demo kitchens together. For I taught a lot to actually my co-medical students, but also we would do a lot for like patients and things like that. So that's always been like a dream of mine is to bring that, to my institution. Brigham and
Oh, that's
MGH.
great.
Yeah, we unfortunately don't have demo kitchens at our main site. I think it's MGH like Revere has one, but it's kind of far away. So that's been like my dream is for us to like get one here at the main campus
Right. Which brings me to the next question. Do you work with dietitians with your neuro patients?
all the time. Me and the MGH dietitian are very tight. I actually just went by to meet with her yesterday because we have this new tube feed formula that we have that I'm like very interested in seeing how it kind of affects our patients' outcomes and things. So I work I work very closely with them. She knows me really well over there, so it's a lot of fun working with her.
That's great. We're glad to hear that.
And actually, it kind of started because in medical school, I was part of this group. It was the Student Nutrition Action and Awareness Council, which stands for SNAC. And it was a really cool group because it was basically the leaders of the group was we had these two dietitians that would kind of mentor us and lead us in like our different initiatives. And like our flagship was this, but we did a lot of other cool stuff. Like trying to think what else. We did like these exercises where we would teach like high school students how to read food labels. Or we did the SNAP
Mhm.
challenge. We all lived on kind of like we used the budget of like food stamps to try to like get a better sense of what a lot of our patients were dealing with so that we could make more practical dietary recommendations. So it was a really cool group that like I had incredible experiences with throughout medical school, and it kind of gave me the unique exposure to work a ton with dietitians and appreciate their role in our patients' care.
That's great. That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. I don't know if anyone is following along, but I'm nearing the end of my chopping, so I'm gonna start getting the pan kind of heating up. I'm gonna put some olive oil in, and I usually just start it on medium heat. I have an electric stove, so it gets very, very hot.
Duskin, what are your thoughts about um, cooking oils? Like, um, olive oil versus other, grapeseed oil and company.
Yeah, so I generally try to cook with extra virgin olive oil. That's kind of what the Mediterranean Mind Diet suggests. I don't know, like, there's a lot of claims about like these other types of oils. I don't know, like, to be honest, I haven't read enough into it to know what's like data versus what's kind of just like claims, but just based on the fact that the Mediterranean diet and the Mind diet specifically like found benefit of extra virgin olive oil over other types of oil, I try to use it as much as possible. Now, when I'm having my like, once in a while steak and I want to sear something and I need a high smoke point, then like, you know, I tolerate, then I'll use some like I'll use like avocado oil just because like you can't use extra virgin olive oil for that. But generally in my usual cooking, I just use extra virgin olive oil. Like it's literally in like our like oil thing that sits by the stove like this. We just put extra virgin olive oil in it and then cook with that.
Yeah, we
May
should
I ask you?
my own.
I love it. Yes, there was a
So,
question.
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Mattia. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned whole grain, which surprised me. I'm Alexia, I'm a psychologist in Maryland, because a lot of people, and I don't know their qualifications, are saying, we have obesity issues, and that bread is bread. That in terms of carbs, whether it's whole food, wheat or I mean, staying away from the processed one, but they're saying for the body there isn't much difference between carbs are carbs. So and when people do intermittent fasting and all of those things, and I saw the Mind diet has these whole grains 3 times a day. I was a little surprised, but it's good for me to hear because I bake sourdough and that's music to my ears. But could you say a little more about that?
Yeah, so it is interesting, and I feel like we need more research on like just the difference of how bread is made in different countries. Because it's like, it is very weird that like, because I know a lot of people with gluten sensitivity who are gluten sensitive in America and not in other countries, which says something somewhat concerning about the way we make our bread here. And by definition, and I can talk more about ultra processed foods and stuff like that. I mean, by definition, whole wheat bread is ultra processed. I mean, sorry, all bread, including whole wheat, is. Um, the literature, though, so far, and so I don't know if they in these studies tested specifically Like I've actually looked like in depth into try to figure out like how the Mind diet and the Mediterranean diet came up with its components because like I'm actually building my own diet and I want to like take some tips from them and it's like it was a little bit arbitrary the way they created these diets and like so have right now is just that it was included as a piece of these diets that, as a whole, decrease your risk of stroke and dementia. I will say from my personal research, which is my prelim data right now, I actually have a pretty good signal that whole wheat bread, that whole grains do reduce your risk of stroke, and that whereas white bread increases your risk of stroke. So so I do think that I do believe in the benefit of whole grain bread, even with this question of like, is all gluten bad? I don't think necessarily. I think that there's a lot. I think it also ends up tying a lot into the microbiome, which we're also studying a bunch in my lab because we do metabolomics and things like that. Um, which is a little obviously very complex and mysterious, but all in all, I do think that it is healthy to eat whole grains based on, the diets we have for at least from a dementia stroke perspective. And we also do have my wife's homemade whole wheat sourdough in our apartment right now.
Thank you. Thanks. So you don't add any bread flour at all, just all 100% whole wheat?
Yeah, she does. She figured it out because our daughter, we basically started doing it because our daughter is obsessed with bread. So I didn't want her to eat white bread. We wanted her to have whole grain. So she does it with 100%. She figured it out over time how to like make it palatable with just pure whole wheat.
Wow.
Yeah, she told me, she's like, I hope you know it's like way harder to do it this way. And I was like, good, I appreciate it. So yeah,
Thank you.
I know it works. I don't know if anyone's from Italy here, but you can, the nice whole wheat bread goes nice as a scarpetta at the end of the with the Fra Diavolo.
Yeah, and Dustin, I
You know,
don't know about you, but I at least since I was a from when I was a kid, where white bread was considered the best, the coolest one. Now the whole like society has really changed in how they view whole wheat and other kinds of bread.
yeah, I feel like it depends on like what you get used to because I remember like as a kid like my parents were actually like I look back in hindsight I was like my parents were like surprisingly good at like being ahead of their time with like nutrition and everything. And I remember them like trying to get me to eat whole wheat bread and I was just like was not having any of it. And then finally when I got on my health kick, it took like a bit of an adjustment period for me to get used to switching to whole grain because I was just so used to white flour. And then now it's like all I like now, but it's like I feel like it's like whatever you get used to, then it's like because I feel like they do just have such distinctive taste.
Yeah, I had sort of a similar experience. My mom would buy white bread, and then my dad would buy whole wheat. So, but they would always go for the white bread as a kid.
I mean, it always tastes. It was always I don't know. It was like always the simpler thing. My parents also, and for anyone following along, just put the garlic, onions, peppers, and jalapeno into the pan. Um, yeah, I guess it's like it must be something about the kids' palates, like where it's like because my parents also like they knew I liked macaroni and cheese, so they really didn't want to serve me the mac and cheese from the box. But so they tried to make their own, and my mom would spend all this time trying to do it, and I just would not eat it. It just never felt like it tasted as good as the box. So right now I'm just trying to get this like nice and browned. I'll bring my computer over. Anyone can see. Yeah, so we're just trying to brown all the stuff in here. And then once it gets to that, then I'll add the tomato puree. Um, the nice thing about this dish is you can like modify it based on how much time you have. I'm I have a work thing after this, so I'm like not doing the crazy cleanup version of this. So so usually when I make it, like if I had like, if this was just Sunday and we were just hanging out, I would take the tomatoes. I have a food mill, so I would just, grind up the tomatoes and turn them into puree myself. But because, it's a weeknight and, I don't want to be cooking for 2 hours, like I just got tomato puree from the store. I actually got passata, which is like kind of the really nice puree that you can use. Um, then there's other ways to modify it. Like, you can pre-chop things. You can decide to not use I've done this before, like when I like wanted to just cook on a weeknight, because usually I target like 20-minute meals. So like I've done this where I I've either bought and pre-chopped stuff or I just didn't even bother with the chopped stuff. And I just put tomato puree with garlic, or I just buy a tomato sauce that has like really clean ingredients, no added sugar, no salt, where it's just like tomato plus maybe oil, basil. And then you just add some red pepper flakes and some seasoning. I like to use Cajun spice too. That's kind of like the only source of salt in this. Um, and then you toss your seafood or whatever your protein is. You can toss spinach on top, and then while you're doing that, you cook your pasta, and it's ready in 20 minutes. So you can kind of make it take as you could do it as from scratch or as modified as you like, which is something I think is really nice about it.
Hey, Jonathan. This is Eric Avery. I'm actually driving in South Texas, and
Oh, nice.
I'm a physician and an artist, and I'm Matthias asked me to participate, but I don't feel like I'm a scientist, and I can't present science. I'm an artist. I do art as medicine,
Uh-huh.
and I was interested in your because you are not talking about basic science as the brain scientist last time. I said I can never talk to this group about what I do, but
Uh-huh.
what you're doing, I mean, but so here's my question, Jonathan. You're talking about the metabolic benefits of cooking on the brain. I want to ask if this is a culinary art, what is the art part? And how does the art part of what you're doing help the person who is recovering from a stroke to process or to engage themselves in an activity that brings them present in a way that they're not? And perhaps, I'm not sure how to ask that question, but I'm asking how art is related to what you're doing right now.
Yeah. Let me think about the best way to answer that. So I guess so is it the two-part question of like how is culinary arts and then how do we use that to help our patients?
Brilliant. Exactly. Well,
Um
does it help a person? Changing a diet help, but
yeah.
the act of cooking do anything that
Yeah. So I'll say it's kind of twofold. So there is some data um, that cooking at home, it's actually not just in the cognitive layer. I think they actually found that people who cook at home have lower risk of, I think there was actually a cancer study recent on this, that cooking at home can actually also reduce your risk of cancer. And then there is kind of the twofold benefit in that it's like, there's the cognitive benefit where you're like kind of stimulating new neuronal pathways because you're having to kind of think creatively about what you're doing, or using it to follow a recipe. So there's that kind of regard. But then there's also the component of like I think a very underrated part of or underestimated part of nutrition is like the part about like just knowing what you're putting in your body. And there's really no way to do that unless you're cooking your own meals. So like just the nature of like looking at what ingredients you're using and cooking it yourself is just gonna make you eat healthier. Um, so that's like something I kind of stress to my patients where it's like as much as you can, it's going to be cheaper and you know what you're cooking. Because this was actually another thing I learned from the demo kitchen working with this incredible chef, where she would say like, if you go to a restaurant, whatever you're getting, even if you're getting like a side of spinach, it's probably not healthy. She's like, chefs are not your friends. We're putting tons of butter and tons of salt in everything because it tastes good. We don't care about how healthy it is. And that kind of stuck with me. So I think that's a really important benefit. It's just like the awareness of knowing what you're cooking. Um, how it's an art, I guess I'll leave that up to maybe Glenn and the rest of the crew. But I guess to me, I've always thought of it as because it's just something that's, I mean, creative. You know, that's actually why I prefer cooking and I can't bake because I can't just follow the chemistry of baking. But with cooking, it's kind of cool where it's like you kind of, I kind of treat it like doing research where I'll look at a couple recipes, I'll get some concepts, but then, you kind of put your own spin on it. You titrate your spices how you want it. You use the ingredients you like. So I think that's kind of the part where the art kind of comes in.
Thank you. I am driving in South Texas, so I'm going to sign off because I need to head on and get down to Laredo. But if you wanted a group that has the worst food in the United States, I'm pulled out a truck stop. Look at truckers and look at the health status of truckers in
Yeah.
America as I travel across the country. But listen, I want to thank you very much, and I'm inspired to be in this group because I can talk about what I do as an artist after seeing this. So, and I am going to sign off, and thank you very much
Yeah,
for
you're
what you
welcome.
And
what.
and
Yeah.
Dr. Avery, I hope you're not cooking and driving.
Oh no, no, no! I can't wait to get home. I'm carrying some good food in my car. I can't wait to get home and eat it. So, okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care. Duskin, something you were saying about like the creativity of cooking is also super interesting. Um, yeah, I don't know how to formulate it clearly, but it's interesting how, you have recipes that look aesthetically very pleasing. Um, and then you have other aspects of cooking which really deals with mindfulness, the mindfulness of cooking, and then the act of cooking as a social experience, especially for certain cultures, right? Really brings people together. So there are so many layers of cooking in addition to nutrition that really are part and parcel of us as humans.
And it's cool because it's like that, you pass down the recipes and the techniques. It's like one of the fun things about when I go home, it's because now I'm interested in, when I was growing up, I didn't have this interest, but now like I'll go in the kitchen and see what my dad's doing and listening to his like, interpretation of what to do. And he'll be like, the recipe says to do this, but like, don't do that. Like, this is how long you got to cook it. This is how you have to do it. And you kind of develop your recipes over time. Like it's kind of funny actually when Galena asked me to put together a recipe for this, I like kind of just like did it off the top of my head because I've never had a recipe for this dish before. I've kind of always winged it. So I kind of like sat and thought about what I actually do in this. So it was cool, but it kind of speaks to the point of it's an art, and I just kind of taste as I go and adjust from there, and you know let the food talk to me. The tomato sauce, I put the tomato puree in now, so I'm just letting it come to like a slight bubble, not like an explosive bubble because I don't want to destroy my kitchen. And then I'll kind of turn the heat down just a smidge, and then my shrimp, and then my spinach, and then I'll cover. And then while I'm doing this, I'm also gonna start boiling water for my pasta.
Jonathan, while you're uh, ladling and boiling there, I one comment I really like this question of how is it an art, and I think you spoke to it a little bit kind of implicitly when you were saying, you meet with your patient and you kind of start with where they're at, and then
Hmm.
you take the science, which is, at times specific and pretty explicit and rigid, and you start to modify to like what their interests are, what their maybe baseline is, what they can do. And I think that's a little bit of the art. It's sort of the art of doctoring, is like taking kind of what we know, but then meeting them into a place, and maybe I shouldn't say doctoring, let's say, any kind of partnership when you're providing some knowledge to and trying to provide some service to someone, kind of thinking how to meet in the middle, like how to take and interpret what you know and meet them. And that takes creativity, that takes skill. And I would argue that potentially is part of the art of what you're doing when you meet with them and say, like, to that, patient, the first patient, it's the double the broccoli, and the second patient, it's like modify something else.
Yeah, there's no textbook to it that can tell you, it's like you really it's kind of interesting, and like this is something I talk about with my mentor, Dr. Rosand, a lot, where it's like, you kind of have to take what the patient's giving you, and like there's no like cookie cutter that works for everyone. That's kind of why he created this thing like the brain care score, where it's here's 10 different ways and you kind of pick which way you want to start addressing to improve your brain health. Because it's exactly that. All patients are different, all of them are going to respond to different things, and you have to always meet people where they're at. Otherwise, no matter how good the intervention is theoretically, it's useless.
So with that, I'm gonna actually push a little bit into maybe one area that I'm interested in, which is the idea of training, a new healthcare workforce that's equipped to provide the types of, for example, service you're providing, which is a little bit outside the norm of how we're graduating our current neurologists. So what's your comment on how we get people closer to that? Like, what do we train them on? Do we train them on cooking, on interpreting the data into a personable way, into communication skills, into should we be doing Dr. Tolchinsky's online, should we be doing like behavioral, like psychological frameworks to help with behavior change? What does our future workforce need to be able to help patients in a way that promotes their greater well-being?
Yeah. I mean, I think that
Should they all just do a fellowship with you at the Brain Health Center?
um they're welcome to. But no, I really it's troubled me a lot, and I mean, this is why I eventually started doing something about it. This was now my second year. I think if I did it twice in residency or once, but I think this is at least my second year giving a lecture on nutrition to the residents, because it troubled me so much that it was not a part of the curriculum. And it's like, diet is not a debatable thing in our field. Like it is, there's clear evidence that improving your diet reduces your risk of stroke and dementia, which are like the two most common diseases in neurology. So I think we need formal training on nutrition, and whether it's one lecture a year, fine. I would prefer if there was, some type of ongoing curriculum, which I think should include, you know, our experts on, motivation that like you brought up, because, for me, and I got asked this actually when I gave the lecture this year about like, what data there is for like making people change their behavior and stuff like that. And I was almost embarrassed because I was like, honestly, my approach has kind of been empirically developed. And I actually don't have this expertise in, understanding all of the literature and research in the field of motivation. So it would really be helpful to have, our site colleagues, or people doing that work, there to also help improve, because I think that is also should be a critical part of training, because again, like so much of what we do is just trying to motivate our patients to make different types of changes. So I think both should be a very critical part of our training.
Sort of going off of what Galina was getting at as well. In your experience, because there are so many components to having someone change their culinary habits that go from, understanding the value of nutrition to their skills in cooking, their habits that you sort of got into this. What do you feel in your experience have been the main barriers to someone adopting a healthier diet?
The main barriers I've seen are, so one is like the biggest one is just like throw too much stuff at the patients. And like patients are just like generally pretty nice. So they'll just like nod at you. and then they're not going to do it because you've just thrown too much stuff at them. So that's one big thing. So it's too complicated. It needs to be simple. Two, it needs to be culturally like competent. You can't just be like tell someone like, "Hey, like you need to eat more kale," but like maybe kale is just not a part of their culture and what they generally eat. So I always at this is why like my first step always, which seems obvious, but I've realized is not like always common practice, is to just ask the patient, like, what do you eat? Like, because it's rare to find a patient that eats zero, that where their diet is like nothing is healthy and it's like the opposite of what they should be eating. Like, usually patients have some mix of things that are, things we want to encourage them to eat and then things not. So then I usually start there. It's like, hey, I like to eat a lot of rice and beans. Okay, well, like, do we think we can like eat more beans and less rice and like just change the proportion there? Sure. All right, that's a better approach than being like, hey, can you just like eat this other dish that you don't know how to make and is not part of your culture and you don't even like? Like, so that's another approach. Um, the financial barriers. So like that's another qualm I kind of have with the mind diet is it's like a fairly expensive diet if you're looking at what's on it. Like it's saying like eat a lot of fish, eat like that, don't just eat fruit, like you have to eat berries. Eat a lot of nuts. So there's a lot of foods on it where it's like if you have a patient with any amount of food insecurity, even pa some patients who don't necessarily even have food insecurity, like it's it's very easy to become a cost prohibitive diet. So which again, then it's like well, now that's not really helpful for the patient. And then the fourth thing, which ties into the whole purpose of doing, a cooking class, is the food has to taste good. Like food is just not, it's not just like a medicine or a pill that you take. Like it's a part of life and it's this social thing. It's like, I don't know about you guys, but like what gets me through a long shift is me thinking about what I'm going to eat for dinner. So like if I'm just eating something that doesn't taste good just to be healthy, then I'm going to be pretty sad and I'm going to stop doing that eventually. So that's the other thing. It's like you need to make recommendations to patients of things that can be palatable. And I usually try to give my patients recipes and say like here's something you can make. It's quick, it's easy, it's cheap, and it will taste good. Um,
There's a question.
no,
And great
yeah,
answer.
question.
Great answer, by the way, Duskin. I really loved it and really practical way to think
Yeah.
about it.
Also, I'm just adding the spinach in now. But I will take questions while doing that.
We have two questions. Let's give Duskin a second to put the spinach
Yeah.
down, and then we can go with the question.
All right. Spinach is going in, and then I'm just going to cover it. And then we'll let it chill for like 10-ish. I think I made up an arbitrary amount of time in the recipe, but it's really just until it looks cooked there. All right. Question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. This is Susan again, dietitian. So I find, I mean, anything that you're saying, I do all the time. It's kind of like I'm in the trenches with the patients. And exactly what you're saying, we say, what are you doing now? And or a lot of times using motivational interviewing to see what they want to do. What also what their family is doing. Working as a family unit. It's patient centered, obviously, but there's so many factors of what holds somebody back, like you said, culturally, but food insecurity, etc. But I find, yeah, giving them a lot of practical tips, it increases their willingness, to make a lot of some of the changes.
Yeah, and I try to, I try to start small and not overwhelm folks, and then kind of go with there and kind of just, yeah, it's kind of just like I just try to meet them where they're at and try and take their feedback about how practical things are. And I encourage them, like I'll ask them like, is this a practical thing that you can do? Like, please be honest with me because like we can work on something else. Like my most important thing for me is like that you're gonna do something It's kind of like, again, like my mentor would always say, like for everything, he's like, perfect is the enemy of good. And I think that that really applies to nutrition too, where it's like, we don't need to get you on a perfect diet. Let's just make small improvements that you think are practical for you.
Right. I don't even call it diet anymore because a
Yeah.
lot of times that's a turn off to people.
Yeah.
So we just say like lifestyle change, you know, healthy eating, like a focus on that for their health, because a lot of times people have there's like a negative connotation to a diet, per se.
Yeah.
Um, so
I really like that too because I think there's the negative connotation, and then I feel like there's this implication that diet is something that, you do it for, a couple months, and then,
right,
you're the outcome you want. It really is. It's like it's lifestyle, and it's like this is something that,
of
needs to be
course,
sustainable for the rest of your life. So like it's got to work for you. It can't be hard for you to make this work. It's got to be something that fits nicely into your life. So I think that's a good word for it.
yes. And the other
Alexi.
thing I was just going to say, sorry.
No, no, keep going.
No, I was going to say for any of the medical people there, you have so much that you do for the patient. So I'm just going to vouch for dietitians out there. Please use our services because that's what we're there for. Don't feel that you have to do everything for patients because we could help. We could work with you as a team. I think that's a really important thing, to keep in mind. That's what we're there for. Whether you're a medical center or if you're a private practice, a lot of times there's outpatient areas in a lot of the large medical centers in maybe your vicinity that people can go to, see someone.
Thing.
Cool. Alexi, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, maybe to build on what was just shared, I find it wonderful. So, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sorry. I said Alexi and then my Alexa thought I was talking to her, so then she started
All
talking.
right. Okay. But I had two short questions. One is I agree entirely that the colleagues I refer to, nutritionists, they refer to themselves as non-dietary dietitians. And the statistics show that over 90% of diets fail long term. They're not sustainable precisely because it's an exclusion. And neuropsychologically, when people need to, I believe in your narrative, you've mentioned salt or sugar are not great or white flour. And when the people inhibit the wish, and it goes very strong things. Like if you listen to chefs that they season heavily, they use salt quite a bit. They use butter quite a bit. And so you're taking away things that are flavorful, and you're saying that's bad. And then we get to the psychology of it all. When we divide our tissues, like saying that fat is bad and, bone is good or muscle is good, we see that a lot in eating disorders and anorexia and bulimia. And the same thing when people are like carrots and chicken breast is good, but sort of butter is bad, they start splitting the food, and it usually, sometimes leads to things. So the trend, I think, is intuitive eating, meaning that listen to your body, interoceptive awareness, and just if you're full, stop eating. But when you're hungry, eat. And if you crave crunchy and salty, then you eat that. Because it's a balance of salt and water. We can't be salt free, right? So, but, I was just sort of saying that when people adopt lifestyle change, so if they do intuitive fasting and then they get used to it and it makes sense to them and it's sustainable and they feel full and they feel flavor, then it's sustainable. But when they're like, I'm going to avoid, this like there's no tomorrow, then usually they go right back to baseline. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I think it's also the point that, again, like, nutrition is just one component of, brain health and things like that. And other things like, your stress level and other things like that are also really important. So if you're stressing so much about your diet, that it's worsening your brain health, then, what's the point of then trying to eat healthier? Because you're just kind of defeating the purpose. So I think that's really good. I think it's also why I enjoy kind of counseling with the end of with my goal being to lower your risk of stroke and dementia rather than, what has been all over the media, like how to lose weight. Because at least, and I try to actually lead with telling people what they should eat more of or what they should eat instead of, because I do try to be very conscious of, all the societal things that are promoting, disordered eating. So that's usually like an approach I take where it's like, eat more vegetables. In my head, it's like, it's going to trigger your, it's like it's going to ultimately suppress the number of calories you eat if you're filling up on vegetables. But I don't like to lead with it that way because, for the reasons you mentioned. For the question about curcumin and improving memory in the chat, so our lab actually has some prelim data that it might be beneficial. They actually created like a curcumin analog that I think it was in a dish at least it lowered um Alzheimer's plaques or some pathological marker of Alzheimer's improved with it. So the data is building. I don't think it's conclusive enough to say that it definitely does, but for what it's worth, I do personally take curcumin because I at least believe in the prelim data, but it's not something like so it's like something that like if my friends ask me, I'd say like, yeah, I think there's probably some benefit. If my patients ask me, I'd say there's probably not enough data yet.
Thanks.
Oh, go
Thank
ahead.
you much for the answer. But we use a very little amount of pepper from Mexican options, by the testing.
Uh-huh.
Then I suppose that putting on just a little of curcumine improve the taste.
Oh, interesting. So you like the curcumin for the taste?
Yeah, and in accord with you because perhaps the hot during the cooking
Mm-hmm.
change the curcumine structure and the supposed effect on the memory patients not be real here with that pasta.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, maybe. I don't personally so it's actually funny because I used to cook with a lot more turmeric. But my wife's not the biggest fan. So when I'm cooking for both of us, which I am for this dish, I usually stay away from it.
Yeah,
But it is interesting, and I think I do add it to soups and stuff too sometimes. All right, just adding a little seasoning. I know we're almost at 8 also, but happy to stick around till the end of the dish. I got so caught up chatting, so we're having such a good time. I'm a big fan of, I don't know if they have this where everyone else is, but I'm a big fan of of the Mrs. Dash spice products. It's like a really good salt-free alternative to spice, and they have like this great mixture of all kinds of stuff that's, you know, nothing really unhealthy in it. It's no salt, no sugar, and it tastes pretty good. So I've been a big fan of their products. Maybe they'll sponsor me one day. I don't know about everyone else's dishes, but my shrimp is just about cooked.
Looks like someone on the phone raised their hand. Go
yeah.
ahead.
I don't know if the shrimps are cooked. The, the shrimps are under the tomato sauce. You know
Say that
how
again.
can I know?
So usually, I mean, how big are the shrimp you used?
Yeah,
How big are your shrimp? Like,
but
I mean, so if you're 10 minutes on, medium to high heat, 10 to 12 minutes, it probably should be okay. But usually I kind of just take a look at it.
5, 8, 10 minutes. Well, is
You
there
can
any other method to know, for example, to
usually
chicken?
when they turn, here, let me try and do this without making a mess. So my shrimp kind of have turned, this is
Yes,
hard to see. It's turned kind of pinkish. So
yeah.
kind of from being like translucent to pinkish. That's when you kind of know that it's cooked through. But
And
you do have to kind of look between the sauce. It might be hard to show you on the camera.
yeah, thank you. And the spinach leeks,
When they turn pink, and they're pink throughout, then they're good to go. The sauce, the nice thing about cooking in sauce is it's a little more forgiving. You're not gonna overcook quite as quickly. So, if you're not sure, you can always leave it in a couple minutes extra and, it shouldn't get overcooked.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think mine's just about done. Any other questions from anyone?
One question I had for you. How did you first come across Fred Diavolo as a recipe?
Um, Sorry, I was doing the official way to check the pasta. Um,
That is the official way, by the way.
yeah,
I say
my
that in Italian.
So I grew up on Staten Island where we have very good Italian food. I was told we actually have the most Italians per capita outside of Italy. So there's a couple of these really great seafood restaurants that I love. I sorry, great Italian restaurants I love, and one of them does this like insane seafood fra diavolo. It's like they do like lobster, they throw whitefish, shrimp, like calamar, clams, just like everything in it. And the sauce so good, and it's got the nice spice to it. It was my favorite dish growing up. So once I started cooking, it was a dish that I really wanted to learn how to make. My one qualm was always like, I wish there was a little more vegetables in it, so that can kind of be a complete meal. So that was kind of my modification I put on it. But it's fun that it's a dish where, you know, sauces just give you a lot of flexibility because you can fix the spice level. You can put pretty much whatever you want in it. So it's just a really flexible dish that I always love. So sometimes I'll do like, if it's an occasion, like I will do a really fancy one where I'll throw lobster and all kinds of stuff in it. So I kind of like the versatility of it, but it's just like a nice way to kind of spice up any meal. Okay, pasta's ready, and I think the Fra Diavolo is ready too. Um, I think it's been probably about 12 to 14-ish minutes maybe for anyone following along. Um, but yeah, I think anyone who's been cooking along can enjoy. Oh, I could put my contact information in case anyone is interested in reaching out further. Take care, Alexi.
Sure, Alexei.
Yeah, this is my email if anyone has any follow-ups or questions. If you're also on Instagram and you want to see any cooking pics or anything for inspo, this is my Instagram.
Alexei, this was absolutely marvelous. Sorry, Alex. I meant Duskin. Duskin, this was absolutely marvelous. Really enjoyed
I'm
it. Thank
glad.
you it was so much fun to go along with you. And for those who didn't cook, I'm sure it was a lot of fun to listen. And thanks for all the tips and the tricks and on how to navigate brain health for our patients. This was a true neurohumanities practicum.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad everyone had a good time, and thanks everyone for your engagement and following along. I had a lot of fun too.
And for those interested, our next session will be on March 18th. you can get in touch with us through the email, and you can find all of the links to our newsletter. And wishing everyone a good night.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Thank you.
A
Bon
lot.
appetit.